What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Champions League quarterfinal action to get to today. First, though, as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. Like I said, today's show all about the Champions League quarterfinals. Not the most compelling set of games in terms of drama and entertainment because of the way they ended. These matchups, at least going in, looked really, really good to me, and that's just not really how this played out. But here we are, so we're going to have an opportunity to kind of talk about the semifinals a little bit too. I'm going to incorporate that in here because, well, for the most part, there were clear winners here. There wasn't a lot of drama and late entertainment in these games. Starting, and I'm going to break this down into semifinal 1 and semifinal 2. So I'm going to talk about the first semifinal and then take a break and then talk about the second set of games leading to the second semifinal. So your biggest, highest profile matchup probably, can argue about the game we're talking about next, but Manchester City, Bayern Munich is where we start today. 1-1 on the game, 4-1 on aggregate. Bayern's goal comes very late via a Joshua Kimmich penalty kick. So this thing was essentially 4-0. I mean, it was over when that goal went in. But Bayern had chances early in this game, specifically the chance that Leroy Sané sent wide. They caused Manchester City some problems. They just couldn't capitalize on those opportunities, and they didn't get that first goal to at least kind of make this interesting. They needed to get a first goal, and they need to get a first goal early. Because then if the next one goes in, all of a sudden it's a 1-goal aggregate score. That next goal sends it to extra time. And you start kind of compiling this pressure on Manchester City, a team that has a history of varying degrees of collapses in the Champions League. What Bayern were never able to do in this game is to make Manchester City truly uncomfortable and to kind of take this out of feeling like it's in Manchester City's control. Because that's where you have seen City snowball. And Pep's talked about this. That they are not good at allowing, once the first thing happens, they're not good at preventing the second one. Once that first goal goes in, there's usually a second that comes right behind it. When they lose control, that is the big question, specifically in this tournament. When they can't control things the way they want, what are they able to do about it? And we didn't get an answer in this tie, because Bayern were never able to, as well as they played, and they had the better chances. They were the better team in this leg because they had to be. Manchester City could just sit there and absorb pressure. They never got that goal that was going to really worry Manchester City. And it nearly fell apart when Dayot Upamecano gets the red that gets wiped out for an offside on Haaland. He then concedes the penalty. Unfortunate. You just can't let your arm get out that far. To me, that's a handball. Was it unlucky? Yes. He was doing the right thing, and then he wasn't. It was an unnatural position. His arm didn't need to be there. He concedes the penalty. Haaland dusts him on the goal. It was over these two legs. Upamecano just had an awful time. And I bring that up in a conversation about kind of what happens to Bayern moving forward. Because obviously, this is going to get regrouped under Tuchel. I'm going to talk about him next. But what became abundantly clear over these two legs is that if Bayern are going to get back to being a team that can win a Champions League, that second center back position has to get sorted out. Upamecano just isn't cutting it. Haaland had his way from start to finish with him and made him look silly on multiple occasions. That's the kind of whether it's Haaland, Benzema, Mbappe, whoever, you are going to, in order to win this tournament, you're going to come up against the best strikers in the world. You have got to have center backs able to cope with it. And Upamecano just wasn't in these games. And he's had a series of key mistakes this season. This isn't new. So that was one thing that stood out to me from a Bayern perspective of what needs to happen to fix this, because they weren't all that bad overall. It's not like they were awful performances. They didn't have the cutting edge, and when you lose 3-0 in the first leg against Manchester City, who want the ball anyway, you are in big trouble. And they weren't 3 goals worse than Manchester City in the first leg. But they didn't, the attention to detail wasn't there, right? They didn't execute at the level they needed to. They gave Manchester City opportunities, and City took them, and they didn't take theirs. So 4-1 on aggregate is harsh, but it's also not all that unfair in terms of where these teams are at when you're comparing them to each other. Even though City aren't having a great season by City's ridiculously high standards. What Bayern have right now is not good enough in this competition against the best teams in Europe. It's probably good enough in the Bundesliga, but it is not good enough against the Cities, against the Real Madrids, against whoever the PSG, whoever you want to throw out there. Right, and that's the bar, that is the comparison for Bayern. And they're not there. You can talk about the striker position too. They need upgrades in order to be competitive when you get to at least the semifinals. Obviously, they got unlucky with the draw in the quarters here. But when you're playing these kind of teams, the teams you're going to have to beat to win a Champions League, they need upgrades at the front and they need upgrades at the back. And then real quick on the Thomas Tuchel part of this. I said this when he got hired, that you're fighting on 3 fronts. They proceeded to immediately get eliminated from the DFB Pokal. There certainly weren't high expectations come Champions League. Now that's gone, and he did very little. By the way, Julian Nagelsmann, perfect through the opening stage of the Champions League until this happened. So it's not like they were struggling in the Champions League before. That change was about the Bundesliga. And do I think if they had Nagelsmann this would have ended any differently? No. I'm not trying to say that the decision to fire Nagelsmann cost them this tie by any stretch of the imagination. My point is simply, you made a managerial change that was surprising, and you did it before any determinations were made about your season. Because the Bundesliga isn't locked up. They're in a good position now. They got some help over the weekend from Dortmund. But they did just draw over the weekend again. I mean, Tuchel has 2 wins, 2 draws, and 2 losses here. And one of those draws was this. So, there were 3 trophies he could have won. 2 of them he's already been eliminated from, which puts even more pressure on them to win the Bundesliga. And that's an expectation anyway, obviously. But it goes back to my original point when this move got made and they hired Tuchel. They made it early enough that you can't just lay all this at the feet of Julian Nagelsmann, and particularly the Champions League. So your idea was we needed Tuchel to fix this. And if he didn't do anything to help in the Champions League. Again, I don't think the result would have changed anyway. But there is an enormous amount of pressure now to make sure they win the Bundesliga. Because otherwise, you look really silly for making that hire. Because Tuchel's a quick fix guy. Look at what he did with Chelsea. We'll get to them next. What he did with that team was pretty remarkable. He's got the ability to kind of defy the odds, which is where you thought, okay, if he can stabilize things in the Bundesliga, which he has to a certain degree, maybe he can work some magic in the Champions League. That obviously didn't happen, so you're out of the cup now. It's Bundesliga, and it's going to be very interesting to kind of see how this all unfolds and what the way that decision gets evaluated moving forward based on what happens the rest of the way. If they continue to build a lead and cruise to a Bundesliga title, then it's hard to argue with it. But if they somehow let Dortmund catch them, after going out this way in the Champions League, after exiting the DFB Pokal, Julian Nagelsmann does not look so bad anymore. There is an incredible amount riding on this for Thomas Tuchel in terms of how this season ends now that they're out of the Champions League. And Manchester City will face the one and only Real Madrid in the semifinals, a rematch of last season. I'm going to save my thoughts on the actual matchup here for a minute and talk about Real Madrid Chelsea first. And my apologies here. We're going to fix our score. It should be a 2 here and not a 0. Excuse me while I multitask. Chelsea, again, have some chances, put up a good fight at Stamford Bridge. Once again, don't take those chances because this is a team without a striker, a team that doesn't finish. And, Courtois had to make a really good save, Marc Cucurella. They had opportunities. Again, it's not like this was a bad performance. And then Rodrigo scores twice, and that kind of finished it. The first one really finished it off, and then the fourth one was the exclamation point. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the same things I've been saying about Chelsea from the beginning. Because it's not a managerial issue. It's a roster construction issue. They don't have a striker. And they have a lot of guys who aren't good finishers. And you saw it again in this game. They had, similar to Bayern, had they gotten that first goal, had they started to put some pressure on, it did feel like they could have gotten that crowd behind them in a big way, and they really could have made this interesting. Because they did well to get it to 2-0 heading home, considering the circumstances and how that first leg played out. And at least in this game, they created the chances, because a lot of what you've seen under Frank Lampard is that, as I was saying throughout Graham Potter's tenure, specifically at the end, he can't make them finish. His job is to get them in positions and creating good opportunities, and they did that. And it stopped under Lampard for the most part. But they did create good opportunities in this game. So that's a positive for Frank Lampard. Ultimately, though, it was unlikely they were going to pull this off. They gave a fine account of themselves. Real Madrid is just a better team. They obviously know how to do it in this competition better than anybody. So Rodrigo gets the goals, puts it away, and that's really that. What I want to talk about for a second here, and I'm saving kind of the Manchester City Real Madrid stuff for a minute. I said this when Frank Lampard got hired for a second time too. He has managed 2 knockout stage ties, 4 total games in his 2 tenures at Chelsea. In those 4 games, his team has been outscored 11-1. 11-1. Now, yes, it was Bayern Munich, it was Real Madrid. 2 of the best teams in the world. How much does that matter, though, when you are Chelsea? And the context is a little bit different here because this Chelsea team just isn't very good. And so, it's not like to me, their performances weren't even disappointing. They were about what you would expect. They put up a little bit of a fight and they're just, they lost to the better team. But this is Chelsea, just in general. This is Chelsea we're talking about. And under Frank Lampard, they have gotten outscored 11-1 in the knockout stage of the Champions League. The idea that somehow you were setting yourself up for success or some kind of magical Champions League run by bringing him back is the part of this I never got. They weren't going to qualify for Europe anyway, at least in a competition that would be befitting of Chelsea, right? The Premier League was basically done, and it's certainly done now because they're not picking up the points. It's not like they're having some kind of resurgence here since Lampard has taken over. So that was basically done for anyways. You had this opportunity to go basically make it an audition. Your focus was here. These 2 games, trying to see if you can get some kind of unexpected run. And you brought a guy in who has not proven he is able to take a Chelsea team and go be competitive in ties like this one. Does he increase your probability over the option you had there in Bruno? Of course, because he's actually, managed and managed in the Champions League. Right? The bar is not high here considering just the situation and Bruno's connection to Graham Potter and all that. But there was just never any reason to believe that Lampard was going to get something more out of this team. And he hasn't. And so the question to me continues to be, did they cost, and we're not going to know this until the summer, did they cost themselves the manager they want because they waited? Or is that manager, whether it's Nagelsmann or somebody else, basically saying, I'm waiting to the summer till decide, and they couldn't have gotten that manager right now? Did they sacrifice anything to bring Lampard in on a temporary basis? Because that's what this all comes down to. The results are what they are. He's certainly not helping himself, but it's also not his fault. They're just not good. The question is, when we get to this managerial cycle in the summer, and the PSG job is, especially after the most recent news about Christophe Galtier, seemingly almost guaranteed to be open. Real Madrid might be open. You might have an Italy job open. Spurs are open. When there are so many attractive options out there, can Chelsea go get their pick? Because the advantage of making that managerial change now is you could have offered that job to anybody you wanted to. Before PSG, before Real Madrid. We're going to have to see how that all plays out. But this was about what you should have expected with Frank Lampard coming in. There was no reason to believe this was going to be some kind of heroic run. And in all honesty, for Chelsea's future, it's better that it wasn't, because then you have to start making some tough decisions about whether to keep him and how you explain letting him go if he did something special. Because there's just no indication he is the right person long term. So that's becoming abundantly clear that at least Chelsea can move on to whatever the next chapter is going to be. Real quick before I take my break on this Manchester City-Real Madrid matchup. I want to talk about one thing in particular. And that is this new system Pep has thrown out there with the back three. John Stones is a holding midfielder next to Rodri. No width approach that was there again in the second leg against Bayern. I continue to believe that can be exploited, and to a certain extent you saw Bayern have some success with Sané and Gnabry on the wing. Again, they couldn't capitalize, they didn't do enough of it, but you saw them cause some issues. And I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at Real Madrid's front three. And I am really curious, because to me this is going to be finally a really good test as to whether this system actually works or whether it's as bizarre as it seems to be in my head. I might just be dead wrong about this. Dead wrong about this. They might just be so good it doesn't matter. I just look at that and I see all kinds of space and all kinds of things that you can capitalize on. But you have to have the ball to do it. And obviously you put John Stones in the midfield, you've got all kinds of bodies to basically just control the game in your, in City's attacking half of the field. But now, without the cover on the wings, right? Because they're not playing with wingbacks. You have, in theory, Vinicius, Karim Benzema, Rodrigo playing 3v3 with Akanji, Ake, and whoever the other center back ends up being. That terrifies me if I'm Manchester City. If Manchester City can get through Real Madrid playing this way, then I need to stop talking about it. I am just, from a tactical standpoint, that is all I can think about regarding this matchup. Is Pep going to continue to use this? And if so, are they going to get burned by it? Or are they going to be so dominant with that extra player in midfield that basically they just don't even have to defend? Because you're talking about arguably the best counterattacking team in the world playing against a team with 3 defenders on the field. Because John Stones is no longer a defender if this is the system that Pep rolls out. And he's been doing it in the Champions League. Where he's changed it a little bit is the Premier League. So I have to expect this is... And maybe he looks at it and he says, we can't do this against Real Madrid. I'm just very curious about how all that's going to work. That is my big thing about this matchup. And then the other part is we're going to get to the other 2 semifinal or quarterfinals and the other semifinal matchup after the break. But you're Manchester City. You're desperately trying to win this competition. Standing in your way are the second best team in Spain and the third and fourth, third and fifth, fourth and fifth, probably third and fourth, I'll be generous, teams in Italy. And yes, is it fair to just categorize Real Madrid as the second best team in Spain? No. This is Real Madrid in the Champions League. And also you got to beat people to win this thing. My larger point is you couldn't have asked for a much better path if you're Manchester City. Now, would you have maybe rather had PSG than Real Madrid? Yeah, sure. But if you get past Real Madrid, you have a team you should absolutely beat in the final. Absolutely beat. And you have 3 teams remaining outside of you who are not winning their league titles and who have not been impressive this season domestically. And it just doesn't matter for Real Madrid, and I get that. Which is why I'm a big believer in separating domestic, league and Champions League, just like regular season and postseason for basketball. I talk about that all the time. So it would be hypocritical for me to sit here and say, oh, it's Real Madrid, they haven't been good this season, therefore Manchester City should win. Because that's not how this works in this tournament. Real Madrid have mastered how to do this. But you just don't know when another golden opportunity like this is going to open up if you're City. Of course, they're going to be there every single year. But when you look at the players who aren't there, I mean, you don't have to deal with Napoli. Mbappe's gone. Messi's gone. Neymar's gone. And, that's really PSG. You already took out Bayern. Barcelona's not there. Arsenal's not in this competition. Your big issue has been Premier League teams. There are none of those left. It's just setting up. This is a golden opportunity because of who is coming out on the other side of that bracket. Now, City's history, that doesn't mean they're going to go win the final. But the pathway, this is to me City's best opportunity yet, other than the fact that they actually, if you look at a path, obviously you take one game against Chelsea any day of the week. Because you still got to get past Real Madrid, and then you still got to win another one at this point. But this is setting up. And I'll say this one more time now, and I'll probably say it again at some point. Erling Haaland did score twice. Sorry. Take that back. He scored twice over the weekend. Getting all the City games confused. He is the plan B they've never had before. And I just will continue to hold on to that and keep picking them to win. That at this point, and I would have done this before anyway, but my pick is City, not because City are the best team remaining, although they are. It's because I have something to point to explain why this is going to be different than every other season in the past. And that is the fact that when things go weird, like they did against Real Madrid last season, there's this guy named Erling Haaland who can just improvise anything he wants and can score goals outside of City's system. All those kind of things. If it's ever going to happen, to me, it's going to happen now. It's going to happen with this team. It's going to happen with this setup. But you still got to get past the defending champions first. You still got to get past all these guys who have been there so many times and have done this so many times and beat you last season. So we're setting up for a phenomenal semifinal there, Real Madrid and Manchester City. I'm going to take my first break. When I come back, talking about the other two quarterfinals and the Italian teams, specifically the Milan teams, that came out on top, setting up a Milan derby in the semifinals. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in today as I recap the Champions League quarterfinal second legs. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Already talked about semifinal 1, Real Madrid and Manchester City. Semifinal 2, AC Milan, Inter Milan. What a matchup this is going to be. I'm going to start with AC Milan getting past another Serie A team in Napoli. 1-1 in the second leg, 2-1 on aggregate. AC Milan get an early penalty. It gets saved. Giroud comes to the rescue to make it 1-0 anyway. There were kind of, at the very beginning, you thought maybe, especially after that penalty got saved, maybe this is Napoli's day. I expected Napoli to come back and win. And AC Milan just kind of keep doing that thing where they stay compact. They've got a 2-goal aggregate lead at this point. And then, those last 10 minutes, Napoli get the penalty. They can't convert theirs either. And then Osimhen does get one back at the end of stoppage time, but it's too little too late. There were opportunities in there. This was the one that was really kind of interesting from start to finish of the 4 quarterfinals. But it just never really felt like Napoli kind of had enough confidence, enough belief, enough things going from a momentum standpoint that they were going to pull this off. It was always just they were able to stay within striking distance, especially after AC Milan got that goal to go up 2-0 on aggregate. And again, ultimately, they were a missed penalty away from making it 2-2 and sending it to extra time. And, winning the second leg 2-1, 2-2 on aggregate. But they can't convert the penalty. They run out of time at the end, and so it is AC Milan that go through. Two main things I want to get to here. One for both teams. On the AC Milan side. And to me, this is where this tie got decided. Rafael Leao was far and away the best player on the field over these 2 legs. Far and away. From the threat he posed, from the actual contributions he made to AC Milan's goals, he was sensational. And I know he's had a not so great season. But he is the kind of player who, particularly in a tournament like this, right, where it's not about showing up every single game in Serie A, it's about rising to the occasion and having moments of brilliance when your team needs them, who can absolutely decide a Champions League tie, and who can decide a semifinal against your crosstown rival. I think I've said this before. I'll say it again here. To me, and I think I talked about this during the World Cup when he didn't get much playing time for Portugal. Outside of Mbappe, from a winger standpoint. So you're not talking about Holland. You're not talking about Lewandowski. He is as good as anybody in the world for me. And maybe he just doesn't get as much recognition because, he plays in Serie A. Like I said, he hasn't been good this season, at least compared to last season where he was sensational and, the best player on the best team in the league and most important player in Serie A. But every time I watch him, if he makes a move, and Chelsea always seems to be rumored, if he gets to a Chelsea, to a Man City, kind of to that next level, gets out of Serie A and gets to not just one of the bigger clubs in the world, but and one of the more historic ones, because obviously AC Milan, massive club, but gets to one of those teams that everybody is kind of paying attention to, specifically, one of the big six in the Premier League. To me, he's one of those guys whose stock is just going to skyrocket on an international fame standpoint. He's sensational. He is so good one-on-one. He is so quick. And he showed it in this tie. To me, that's where it was decided. AC Milan had the best player on the field. Napoli stars, Osimhen got the goal. But other than that, they just didn't do enough. Napoli had their chances. They couldn't take them. And Leao made sure that AC Milan didn't need very many. That's what he offers you. And on the Napoli side of this, I mentioned Osimhen. Obviously, they didn't have him for the first leg. Can't do anything about that. That's an injury. Just really tough luck. And one of the things they've been really good about this season is performing without him there. And you would much rather have him at the home leg than the away leg. 1-0 was not a big deal coming back home. The part of this I didn't get to talk about because I didn't have a show last week. That is the other thing from a Napoli standpoint. You got two of your most important players suspended for this game. The most important game of your season. For no particular reason. There was no need for Kim to do what he did. There was no reason for Andre Frank Zambo and Gisa to do what he did in the first leg. That is not unfortunate. That is self-inflicted. And it very well could have made the difference. Because now you have a combination of you're not at full strength, you're missing your best defender, you're missing the guy who kind of makes your midfield run, who's been so good this season, and your attacking stars didn't have a great day. All of that was a little bit too much to overcome when you already were in a hole heading into the second leg. That part of this cannot get overlooked. That is on Napoli and those two players for making the choices they did in the first leg. Maybe it wouldn't have made the difference in the end, but it is part of the conversation here with how close they came, despite the fact that they weren't great over the 180 minutes. These margins are really thin in this competition, and AC Milan clearly are just comfortable playing against Napoli because they've just played them 3 times, beat them twice, got a draw the third time. You need to give yourself every opportunity if you're Napoli, and they just didn't. Through Osimhen's injury, through the suspensions, through the lack of finishing, the missed penalty. There were just too many things that went against them, most of which were their own fault. And so here AC Milan are somehow, some way, and thanks in large part to Rafael Leao. And they will meet none other than Inter Milan in the semifinals, as I mentioned before. That 5-3 aggregate 3-3 final score at the San Siro is deceiving. It was 5-1, and then Benfica scored 2 late consolation goals to at least make it a little bit more competitive. But it was too late for that to put any kind of pressure on Inter whatsoever. You come in with your 2-goal lead. Benfica have been incredible at home all season. And Inter went in there and got 2 goals. That's where Benfica lost this. And then Nicolo Barella gets the curler, really good goal to give Inter the early lead. Now you're trying to dig yourself out of a 3-goal hole. And then there is the lovely cross. Benfica get a goal. And you think maybe, just maybe, they can pull this off. And then Lautaro Martinez gets another one, so it's 4-1 on aggregate. And then Joaquin Correa comes on the field and then basically immediately scores, and it's 5-1. And that was kind of that. So the game itself was closer to Benfica at least winning and making the aggregate scoreline a little bit more competitive, a little bit closer. But there is no disputing who the better team was here, and it was 5-3 was probably a little bit generous to Benfica. Inter had this thing wrapped up with 15, 20, 30 minutes to go. And I do want to give Inter some credit, because I've been really hard on both Milan clubs, and I won't apologize for that. They've been bad this season. They've been incredibly inconsistent. Go look at what they've done in Serie A. And even through this, Inter can't win league games right now. They've had this really bad stretch. But they show up in the Champions League. And that's really where I want to give them some credit. Right? You come through this group that includes Barcelona and Bayern Munich. And I don't hold what happened in the Champions League too much against Barcelona. To me, it was the result of a bad draw and them not being cohesive and at their best yet. It's a much bigger deal because of the financial situation they put themselves in. It's not embarrassing because of the teams in their group. So Inter find a way to go through. They do a pretty good job in the group stage. And then they face the two Portuguese teams. And I know they only snuck by Porto. You could argue Porto deserved to go through, or they Inter caught some breaks there. But that Porto team is, right now, I would argue, if you ask me whether I want to play Benfica or Porto, I want to play Benfica. That Porto team just beat Benfica. That Porto team played Inter better than Benfica did. That's a really good team. And Benfica are kind of collapsing here after being so consistent for most of the season. It's losses in the league. Now you're out of the Champions League. But these are two very, very good teams. It's not like Inter had an easy path to get here. And I'm not saying they had the most difficult path. But you compare that to what what AC Milan got. Easier group. Chelsea just can't score goals. And that was your big threat in that group. Then you get Spurs, who just have no attacking initiative at that point. So you get by them. And obviously Napoli, having a phenomenal season, hasn't been here before with this kind of pressure. You've got 3 key players out for one of the 2 legs. Again, nothing you can do about it. And AC Milan were the better team. They deserve to go through. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. But just to compare what these two teams have done in the Champions League, to me, what Inter has done has been much more impressive. Absolutely none of that matters when they're going to go play each other, though, because any derby, my rule is you just throw all logic out the window. It's going to be captivating. But here we are with these two clubs who I talked about from the beginning of the season. Somebody needed to go help Napoli here and kind of uphold Serie A's standing because everybody was having really bad seasons and it wasn't going great in the group stage. And then they both turned it around and then they just kept beating teams. And I still have not been impressed at all by either team this season. But now we're talking about two. There's one league that has two teams in the semifinals, and that is Serie A, and Serie A is going to get a team in the final, and it's not Napoli. That matters from a Serie A reputation standpoint. And it matters for these two clubs who hadn't delivered in the Champions League until now. Obviously, they've got the league titles to show for it. They're not going to win one this year. But the next step was, can you get somebody outside of Juventus to do something in the Champions League? And both Inter and AC Milan have delivered. So you got to give them their props for that. In terms of this matchup, I don't have too much on it now, other than I'm going to go back to my Rafael Leao point. To me, that's where this gets decided. If he's the best player on the field, if he is able to dictate the terms of engagement, AC Milan are going to win. If you're able to keep him quiet, I like Inter's collective better, and I certainly like Inter's ability going forward better. Assuming Leao is not otherworldly. Because the AC Milan just don't have that much outside of him. And they are just not very inspiring in attack sometimes. Whereas this Inter team has, two big name strikers. I know Lukaku has really struggled, but he gives you a very special set of skills. And obviously you got Lautaro Martinez. I just feel better about Inter's variety in attack. Now, question is, can they defend? And then also the other part of this is going to be who gets the first goals here in both legs. Because a lot of what AC Milan is doing is set up Spurs, Napoli, same thing, right? Go ahead, sit back, try and get yourself a second, try and keep your clean sheet. And if you do one of the two, you're probably going to be okay. What happens if they can't use that formula again because Inter are ahead? What happens if AC Milan have to go chase this? That's the other key in this for me, is whose terms does this get played on? Real Madrid, Manchester City, that first goal just doesn't mean as much because those two teams can go score 3 in 10 minutes, This is going to be much more structured in true Italian fashion. Those goals are going to mean a lot more. And so I want to see, can AC Milan dig themselves out of a hole? Because I will, whether it's the semis or the final, my general philosophy, same with NCAA tournament, you are going to have something go wrong at some point. I was talking about this with Manchester City too. What is your ability to adapt to that adversity? You can't just do this one way because you're not going to, these teams are too good for it to just always work out the way you want. And so far it has for AC Milan. Right? Inter went and put up 5 goals here. They just gave up 3 at home, and I know 2 of them were late. And they were completely comfortable because they went and scored 2 at a place where nobody wins. They kept a clean sheet at a place where that team, Benfica, never loses. And then they scored the goals at home, even though Benfica kind of got it going offensively, at least at the end. They scored the goals early enough where those goals didn't matter. That's the kind of versatility I want. It doesn't mean it's going to happen in the semis. It could be the final, right? Real Madrid scored the first goal. Manchester City scored the first goal. What happens when AC Milan have to play from behind? I find it hard to believe they're going to get through the next 2 rounds without that happening. And if they do, full credit to them, because that could very well mean they're winning this whole thing, because they have that part of it set up. If they get the lead, you saw what they did to Napoli, you saw what they did to Spurs, rendered both of those teams and all those great attacking players basically silent. But it's all based around scoring that first goal. Will that happen again with Inter? In the semifinals, those two, another Milan derby, can't wait for it. I'm going to take one more break and then come back with the weekend look ahead, taking a look at everything happening over the weekend around the soccer world. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one final time to the Touchline Talk Show. It is now time for the weekend look ahead. So much going on this weekend all around the world, starting, as always, in England in the Premier League. Southampton at Arsenal on Friday. I brought this up before, talking about in my weekend roundup, talking about Arsenal's draw with West Ham. This is the game. They are at home against the worst team in the Premier League, who seems more and more resigned to their fate. Arsenal have to win. If Arsenal do not win, that is where the conversation about the title race is allowed to change. Until they drop these points, though, the story is still the same. It's within their control. They just need to draw at the Etihad on Wednesday, a week from today. And it's up to them after that. If they drop these points here, then we're having a different conversation. This is an absolutely massive game for Arsenal. They have got to stop the bleeding, and they got to stop it here. And they've got to get themselves a little bit of confidence heading into that massive showdown a week from today. Your other games in the Premier League: Wolves at Leicester on Saturday, two teams in the relegation race. West Ham at Bournemouth Sunday, same story there. And then your other kind of higher profile game, Tottenham at Newcastle on Sunday. Newcastle losing to Aston Villa over the weekend, and Spurs didn't help themselves either, but that battle for fourth has tightened a little bit. And Spurs have an opportunity here, if they can go to St. James Park and get 3 points, to really change the complexion of that race and put a lot of pressure on Newcastle to finish this. Because there was the idea that maybe Newcastle are going to stumble, and then they reeled off all those wins, and they looked very clear. And I even said it at one point that to me there were 4 teams. I didn't really see Spurs getting back into this top 4 race in a meaningful way. But that happens if they win this game. And if they don't, and especially if they lose, now you're in a really good spot if you're Newcastle, and I would be more worried about Brighton than I would Spurs at that point. So that game has massive ramifications for that 4th spot and kind of how that's going to be viewed in the final weeks of the season. And then, of course, the other thing happening in England this weekend, the FA Cup, Sheffield United at Manchester City on Saturday, Manchester United at Brighton on Sunday. Will we get a Manchester derby? Will we get Sheffield United in the final? We're going to figure out who's playing for another trophy those 2 games. Again, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. In Italy, Bologna at Hellas Verona, as Hellas Verona on Friday, as Hellas Verona are trying to avoid relegation. Torino at Lazio on Saturday. Spezia Calcio at Sampdoria on Saturday. Both those teams are in the relegation battle. Inter at Empoli on Sunday. Can Inter put together multiple wins here and actually do something in Serie A? Lecce at AC Milan on Sunday. Same story for AC Milan. How do you respond after going through in the Champions League? And Lecce trying to avoid relegation. And then finally, your big game in Serie A, Napoli at Juventus. A little bit more interesting than it would have been a couple weeks ago, just because of Napoli's struggles recently. And there seems to be a little bit of a motivation issue, which is understandable, kind of getting it over the line in Serie A, because they're up by so many points. And now that's all that's left to focus on. So can they kind of really make sure it doesn't get stressful by at least coming away with a point here and feeling a little bit better about themselves heading into these final games? In Germany, Stuttgart at Augsburg on Friday. Lots of relegation games on Friday. That's another one. Stuttgart trying to avoid relegation. Bayern at Mainz on Saturday. Eintracht Frankfurt at Dortmund on Saturday. Dortmund, they're still right there. However, you can't count on Bayern to drop that many more points. And if Dortmund come close but don't win this thing, they are looking back at what happened over the weekend as the reason why. You are up 2 goals and a man. Then Gio Reyna gives you the lead back after you conceded 2 playing 11v10. And you still can't find a way to win that game. That is going to haunt them to no end if that ends up being the difference, if those points end up being the difference between them winning or not. I ultimately don't think it will be, but this is another opportunity. If Bayern drop points, and this is one of the more difficult games left on Dortmund's schedule with a good Eintracht Frankfurt team coming in. So, big weekend there for the Bundesliga title race. Werder Bremen at Hertha Berlin. Hertha Berlin in the relegation race. Wolfsburg at Bochum. Bochum in the relegation race. Both of those games on Saturday. And then Sunday, Union Berlin at Borussia Mönchengladbach. Schalke, relegation race at Freiburg. Top 4 race. Interesting one there on Sunday. And then Leipzig at Leverkusen on Sunday. So you've got all kinds of relegation stuff. Those teams fighting at the top of the table as well. In Spain, Cadiz at Espanyol on Friday. Another relegation game. Celta Vigo at Real Madrid on Saturday. As Barcelona kind of dropping some more points, can Real Madrid keep things going? Speaking of Barcelona, your game of the weekend in Spain, Atletico Madrid at Barcelona on Sunday. This is fascinating just because Barcelona also seem to have lost a little bit of interest in La Liga, and Atletico Madrid are just rolling people. If there's a game for Barcelona to show up, it's this one. And if there's a team that's going to punish Barcelona for not showing up, it's Atletico Madrid. If they lose this one, again, it's kind of the same situation you're in if you're Napoli. Can you avoid making this stressful on yourself by just getting that one win, that one good performance against a big-time opponent to make yourself feel better? And then Valencia at Elche, also on Sunday. Valencia right there in the thick of that relegation battle. France, I'm going to just talk about the top of the table. The relegation battle is kind of not officially decided, but there's a very clear bottom 3 there. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. PSG at Angers on Friday. Monaco at Lens in a huge game on Saturday. Top 4 implications, trying to keep pace with Marseille for that other Champions League spot that goes automatically to the group stage. Marseille at Olympique Lyon on Sunday. So there could be some movement, a very, very big week for the teams right beneath PSG, 2 of them playing each other in Monaco and Lens. Then, Major League Soccer on Saturday. The games I'm most interested in this weekend, Portland at FC Cincinnati, Toronto at Philadelphia. These are 2 teams who haven't started particularly well that I had really high hopes for. Can one of them start to get it going here? How did the Union kind of manage this, knowing that the semifinals of the CONCACAF Champions League are coming up next against LAFC? Speaking of LAFC, they head to Nashville. Austin at LA Galaxy. The Galaxy have got to get this thing on track now. I talked about that this weekend after El Tráfico. To me, the confidence is so feeble at this point that if you don't turn it around the next couple weeks, you might just lose your season altogether. It's not as much of the gap can't be overcome as it is, do you have the mental fortitude to do so after another demoralizing defeat against your arch rival? And then Minnesota at Seattle, both teams starting well this season. Curious to see what they look like going against each other. In the NWSL, also want to mention that tonight, kind of as I'm talking and later, the Challenge Cup is going to start and kind of get underway. It's through the NWSL season this year, so feel free to check those games out as well. This is obviously the weekend look ahead, so focusing on the weekend, back to regular NWSL action. Your game, Chicago at OL Reign on Saturday, Houston at Washington on Saturday. Curious about that one. Both teams, Houston off to a good start, Washington kind of trying to get things back on track after last season. North Carolina Courage at Gotham FC on Saturday. Louisville at Portland on Saturday. Orlando at Kansas City Current on Sunday, who just parted ways with Matt Potter. The reasoning was interesting and not very clear. It makes you wonder what happened, whether we're going to learn more about that. And this is the same club that also had somebody, a draft pick, that draft pick's mom, go on social media and lay out an entire series of very troubling developments related to the way that her daughter was treated by this team. This is a team that is, I went to go pick, you can go find it in my 5 things from the week, I believe it was 2 weeks ago. I went from the Kansas City Current website to pull their mission statement, or whatever you want to call it, about trying to be, the preeminent standard bearer for women's soccer. That's not the exact phrasing, but they're talking a big game. And now you have both of these things that have happened in the first month of the NWSL season. And obviously, this isn't... Sorry, hold on one sec here. This is another coach leaving under mysterious circumstances after last season. This is more issues in terms of player safety, player concern. I just wanted to spend a minute talking about that because Kansas City have a lot of questions to answer right now. And my big thing coming into this season was, can we keep it on the field? Can we keep the conversation about what's actually happening? Can we keep it about the players doing what they love? And here we are, 2 stories already coming out of Kansas City that are not related to the players actually performing on the field. And then finally, San Diego at Angel City. Always look forward to this one as well. Julie Ertz joining Angel City. Curious to see how that plays out. I'm not convinced it's going to be a incredibly impactful signing in terms of raising Angel City's ceiling to making them a title contender. But this is about the World Cup. Vlatko Andonovski has made it clear, and for good reason. She needs a club team. She needs to play consistently. That is going to happen at Angel City. So, don't exactly know what the timeline is for that, whether the plan is for her to play this weekend, but we will find out in that game. And then the other thing I want to mention real quick, we also have the Women's Champions League semifinals this weekend. Barcelona at Chelsea on Saturday, Arsenal at Wolfsburg on Sunday. I haven't really talked about this here, so I'll talk about it real quickly for 1 second. Lyon, PSG have dominated this competition. It's at least one of them in the final, it seems like, every single season. I've talked about this with Barcelona before, and it's true again here that if Barcelona win this, there is just this part of me that it's hard to go make your claim as the best team in the world if you're not actually playing Lyon. But on the flip side, you've got this brilliant opportunity if you are Chelsea, if you're Arsenal, if you're Wolfsburg, and if you're Barcelona. Right? Last time the French teams weren't there, Barcelona beat Chelsea. They're going to meet again in the semis here, so we're not going to get that final again. But Arsenal, I think the last time Arsenal made it this far was 2012-13 or something like that. Wolfsburg obviously have a very storied history, haven't been around the later stages, or if they have, it's been a lot of hammerings by the French clubs. So this is just a fascinating, wide open Champions League semifinal here. And after we just got some rather blah quarterfinals on the men's side, I'm really hoping that the women's semis deliver, so be sure to check those out as well. That is all for weekend look ahead. That is all for tonight's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.